I'm going to act as the clerk and call to order, well, first call to order the May 5th special meeting, of which the attendance by the clerk would be Counselor Anderson Burgos.
Here.
Counselor Bartley. Counselor Graney.
Here.
Counselor Hernandez.
Here.
Counselor Leahy.
I'm present.
Counselor Bourne Martinez.
Here.
Counselor Lisi.
Here.
Counselor McGee here. Counselor McGivern.
Here.
Counselor Murphy.
Here.
Counselor Sullivan.
Here.
Counselor Tallman.
Here.
Counselor Bacon.
Here.
All right, so we got the attendance. Dear counselors, I'm calling a special meeting for the city council for Tuesday, May 5th at 6-ish, we'll call it, to discuss the ongoing coronavirus crisis and the city response. The agenda is as follows: update from the mayor, update from the Board of Health, update from the Emergency Management and Recovery, which would be the acting director, update of command planning teams, Marcos from planning, update from the city financial planning and budgeting, which would be Tanya and Katie Jackowski. And then we have additional speakers, which would be Jeff Petrikowski, Chief of Fire, Manny Febo, which would be Chief of Police, Mike McManus from the DPW as the director, and Jeff Trask is the chair of the Mayor's Emergency Management Council. So with that, I'll turn it over to the mayor, have everyone give an update, and then open up for questions.
Sounds good. Thank you, Counselor, and thank you all for being available for this special meeting tonight. I thought it would be a good opportunity just for us in the Emergency Operations Center, the administration, to provide a comprehensive update on our efforts since the onset of this pandemic locally, and spend a little bit of time providing a recap and then hand it off to other folks in the agenda. But just a repetitive theme will be my deep thanks and appreciation for the team here at City Hall, the department heads you'll hear from tonight, the staff at City Hall, and of course the people of the city of Holyoke for their cooperation and generosity throughout the last several weeks. As all of you know, as counselors and Holyokers, that we as a city know when to come together in a time of need, and this certainly isn't any different. And none of the work that we've done the last several weeks would be possible without cooperation and collaboration from a number of different stakeholders, public, businesses, and just everyday people. And also want to thank all of you for interfacing with constituents who are scared and need information. I know many of you have been sharing our updates from Kate Chrysler from Wdowiak, who's been serving as our public information officer, been doing a fantastic job relaying information to all of you, but also to the general public. And just want to thank you for amplifying that information as much as possible. I wanted to, again, just call this meeting to, obviously, this is an important time for the city, and it's been a really critical time over the last several weeks. And Holyoke isn't unique in that, all of us are experiencing some very uncertain times in our respective communities. And I am very proud of the work that our team did in being very proactive on this effort. It was back in February that we convened our Emergency Management Advisory Council, which is made up of both internal and external partners that were meeting and communicating on a weekly basis on Friday mornings. And that includes the team at City Hall, Police Chief and Fire Chief, Action Ambulance, the Board of Health, the Holyoke Medical Center, the Holyoke Health Center, as well as the Holyoke Public Schools. And so as we started getting more information about the potential impact on the United States and Massachusetts, our community, we started having those conversations earlier than most communities. And I think that's certainly making a difference here. And we've seen this, our response to this pandemic locally in three different phases. Phase one being prevention and saving lives. Phase two being mitigation, so mitigating the impact and the pain this is causing to residents and small businesses. And number three, as we look ahead towards recovery. And so prevention, mitigation, and recovery. And we've sort of categorized our work in those three main pillars as we look at what we want to focus on and what we have focused on. And so prevention, obviously, are we doing everything we can to prevent outbreaks and flatten the curve? And Want to thank, we've had, again, dozens of volunteers across the city. Contact tracing, for example, I want to thank school nurses that were redeployed to partner with our Board of Health, and Sean can talk more about those efforts. But we've done a lot of different work in that respect. We established staffing policies early on, and so, quarantine policies, work from home policies for City Hall staff, and then also establishing internal communication among both department heads and all city staff, but also external facing communication, whether it's with the Holyoke Medical Center, MEMA, FEMA, the Lieutenant Governor and the Governor, regular calls and communications that we have out of the EOC on a regular basis. And so a lot of that work has been in prevention. On phase 2 and mitigation, mitigating the impact, and it's oftentimes in crises like these that our most vulnerable residents are most impacted by this, not just in the health space, but the economic, financial hardship, our entrepreneurs. And so this has included everything from making sure people have food to making sure people have shelter. I know many of you have seen the work we did around making sure that those kids in the public schools that don't have access to devices got Chromebooks. And so we had upwards of 1,500 devices distributed to Holyoke Public School students. We've had 16,000 meals a week served by the Holyoke Public Schools in partnership with Sodexo. And so hats off to Sodexo and staff in the Holyoke Public Schools that are actually staffing those food distribution sites. And we've now had over 100 families take advantage of the partnership with Comcast to provide 6 months free internet service to those families that didn't have internet access at home. Obviously, remote learning capability. Not everyone has the privilege of having connectivity at home. And so that was a very important milestone in work that we did with Comcast there. Also, we worked very quickly, even before the state legislature passed bills around eviction moratoriums and utility shutoffs, water. Really proud of our water department, Holyoke Gas and Electric, Holyoke Housing Authority, all quickly made it very clear that utilities wouldn't be shut off, water wouldn't be shut off, no one would be evicted from our housing with the Housing Authority due to financial hardship as a result of this pandemic. And so those are a couple of the things in mitigation. And then recovery obviously is sort of where we look ahead to, but recovery, I don't want to talk about recovery as if the pandemic is behind us, because recovery also includes a lot of prevention and a lot of mitigation. This isn't a traditional recovery as if we're recovering from a fire or a hurricane or a tornado. This is something that is going to continue and linger at least until the point there is a vaccine and we can prevent widespread traction of the virus in our communities. And as long as we continue to listen to the data and the science, we'll continue to save lives. And I think that has to be a guiding light here in particular. We established an emergency operations center directly out of the mayor's office. Marcos will talk later about the different planning teams that have been largely advisory. And in terms of recovery, it obviously involves a lot of interfacing with state and federal government, MEMA and FEMA, and Mike, our acting emergency operations director, will be able to talk a little bit further about that. I wanted to address emergency expenditures and spending. You may have seen there was an article out earlier on Mass Live about Springfield and how they've spent upwards of $4 million in deficit spending for emergency purposes. I do want to make it clear we haven't spent a single dollar in deficit spending for this purpose. And that is largely due to the good work of our department heads, police chief and fire chief, shifting some operations and reallocating already appropriated dollars by the council that will also be eligible for 75% reimbursement. And so as of now, we haven't deficit spent as a response to this, which I think puts the city in a better financial position moving forward and gives us more leeway to respond to those needs that we have ahead of us. Want to also, I know Kate and Tanya are on the agenda, and Kate is finance director for the EOC, and we can get a little bit into that. I know there'll be a lot of questions, but I did want to make it clear because I know the budget and some questions came up at the finance meeting last night, and so as many of you know, information is rapidly changing. Every assumption that we had from both the state and federal government has to change to some extent, but some of those things are staying stable. We are having continued conversations with the Baker administration, but particularly the Mass Municipal Association, and so the consortium of mayors and city and town managers that are constantly in communication with the state about what kind of aid do we expect. But as you know, on the federal level, a lot of this hinges on whether or not the next package is going to include direct aid to cities and states. And if that does happen, how much aid to the city of Holyoke, how much aid to Massachusetts, and then also figuring out, the state's rainy day fund, so on and so forth. How much is that going to trickle down to cities and towns? And so those are some of the things that we're considering right now. I will just want to assure you that you will have a budget to you by the state mandated date of May 15th, 45 days before the start of FY21. I will be filing a full fiscal year budget, and so a 12-month budget. And obviously with the caveat that is every year that the budget formation process is largely fluid between now and when we set the tax rate in December. And so I plan to use the governor's proposed budget as a baseline. It's the only budget available to us at this moment. And we know traditionally that the state, the budget that comes out of the House and Senate is traditionally more favorable to local cities and towns in terms of direct aid to cities and schools. But we are going to use the governor's budget, as we have in the past, as a baseline for state aid. And as you know, between now and in the months to come, those numbers can increase and they could also decrease. And so we'll make appropriate decisions as we get more information. But I do think it would be premature for us to make largely drastic decisions based on assumptions that may not come to fruition. But we also want to think long and hard about what some of those decisions would be. And we want to be fully transparent about that in the weeks and the months to come. I will also say locally, in terms of local receipts, the things that we do know, we've been analyzing receipts for March, and we're looking at local receipts for April now, which we assume will be more accurate than March, given that the financial impact has been harder more recently for folks. We are happy to see that property tax collections are on par with where they usually are for now, which is really good news for the city. That's the vast majority of local receipts that we get in. And we're going to be analyzing the meals and hotels tax receipts as well, so we can do some projections. But you will see in the FY21 budget, local receipt projections will be decreased. And Kate and Tanya can talk a little bit more about that, but we want to be as conservative as possible in terms of that, and obviously not assume we're going to get every dollar that we got in this current fiscal year. And let's see. So those are just some high-level updates that I wanted to provide. I'm going to pass it next to Sean, our Board of Health Director. And before I do that, I just again want to thank all of our department heads, all of our city staff for being patient and resilient. This has been a difficult time for a lot of folks, a lot of workplaces, and people have been stepping up and in so many different ways. And also, again, thank the people of Holyoke. But particularly want to thank Sean and the team at the Board of Health. Sean has been, the right person to lead the Board of Health in this pandemic, and I couldn't be more proud of the work that he's been doing, listening to data and science and making sure that we're making decisions with the public health in mind. And, I look back at the decision we made in early March around the St. Patrick's Day parade, and, there was some community doubt as to whether or not that decision was the best decision. But obviously, looking back, it was the only option that we had, and it was in no small part because of the expertise of Sean and the 3 Board of Health Commissioners, our fire chief, our police chief, that gave the best advice. And I, as mayor, am only as good as the people around me and the people that work for the city and the people I work for. And so I'm just really proud of the work that everyone's doing. And so with that, I'll hand it back over to Sean. I do want folks to have an opportunity to give their updates, and then I hope we'll have some time at the conclusion before the regular city council meeting to answer any questions.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate that. Just a brief overview of the public health situation in Holyoke. The Board of Health has been working very closely with the Department of Public Health and also some of the local shareholders, local medical facilities. That includes Holyoke Medical Center, Holyoke Health Center, all the long-term care facilities. We've found it really important to establish a good communication base. Some of the facilities that are facing increased challenges because many of these facilities were not designed to deal with a national pandemic. I mean, this is not something that many of these places could have foreseen. Their layouts are not conducive to some of the recommendations that were put in place. And so we have done our best to partner with the state and offer as much guidance and counseling and advice as we can. We've worked closely with the mayor's office to, as much as possible, provide resources, whether or not it's as simple as sharing contact information between facilities, providing people with the right outlet, or for instance, a facility needed face shields. We were able to set them up with a local company that was producing face shields. And so sometimes the role of the Board of Health can be as simple as facilitation, or recognizing a need, or recognizing that maybe there is time to change the way that we're monitoring the situation. So that's been a concern for us, a focus for us, is making sure that we keep in touch so that nothing is overlooked. As for cases, we're at about 671 cases. That was about 3 p.m. that was reported. So that's just a little less than 1% of the confirmed case total statewide. About 74% of that is associated with long-term care facilities. So the community, what they refer to as positives in the community, which are not associated with a long-term care facility or a medical facility, are a smaller proportion of our confirmed cases, but that may be due to the fact that testing was much more readily available in facilities than it is at large at the initial rollout. And so the data can't always be interpreted directly as a black and white. There's a little bit of context that's necessary there. Testing for people who don't have symptoms is still very limited. And it does not seem as if that's going to change in the immediate future. The priority has been for symptomatic people. So if you have a fever, if you have a cough, if you're experiencing gastrointestinal symptoms, you're much more likely to get a test than you are if you're in exposure, but you're not exhibiting any symptoms. Now, certain, we'll say, fields like law enforcement, first responders, nurses, and now grocery store workers, they've been kind of bumped up to priority testing. The Big E is the facility locally where that is the most accessible. There are some private dedicated testing facilities that are around. So we're starting to get, the case counts continue to climb, but I think the association there is not that cases are spiking suddenly. It's that testing continues to be available and those numbers continue to be reported. The way the Board of Health is working to sort of monitor this is through contact tracing. The Board of Health uses an online portal called MAVEN, which is the Massachusetts Virtual Epidemiological Network. And that is monitored by the Department of Public Health, and it's hosted by Health and Human Services. Anytime a resident of Holyoke, that includes people who live in long-term care facilities in the city, tests positive, that's reported to the Department of Public Health, and then it's assigned to our office. And we then contact that person either by phone or through a letter if necessary. And we conduct what's called an interview, where we get some information that's demographics, age, race, gender, and then it goes into possible practices or activities that may have led to exposure, such as traveling on public transportation, a hospital visit, going to a gathering. We gather all that information, and then we also gather who they were exposed to. The timeline for exposure has changed as concepts have evolved. Originally, it was 2 weeks when this first started. We were asking people, whom have you come in contact with 14 days prior to symptoms? Now the state has reduced that time frame to 48 hours. And so we then get a list of whom they've been contacted in 48 hours. And then contact tracing is something you're hearing more about. We call those people that they've been in contact with and notify them. You've been exposed to somebody who's tested positive. These are the steps that the CDC and the Department of Public Health recommend, which is, quarantine, isolation, the hygiene that's there. There are some individual challenges that people are going to face if you live in a large household, for instance, or your spouse is a first responder or somebody who works in a sensitive environment. So we provide a lot of individual consultation, try to address personal challenges that people may have. especially when you have to advise, spouses to sleep in separate rooms, isolate from each other for 2 weeks to make sure that the spread doesn't happen. If, say, both are first responders, one's a firefighter, one's a police officer, you can't allow there to be a household spread because that just increases the danger to the community. So we do a lot of nuanced work. I just want to thank the Holyoke Public School nurses. They've been a great resource. They've come online. Many of them have gotten on the Maven system, which can be a little time consuming. It requires some specific credentials, and they have been doing the contact tracing as well. Reaching out to people who have been exposed or who are sick as timely as possible is really an important step in reducing community transmission. And that is also the way that we're going to deal with phased reopening of the economy. As people return to public places, return to gatherings, return to restaurants, bars, any facilities like that, when there is a spread, the best way that we can reduce that from growing rapidly is to get a hold of them right away, let them know that they should isolate, let people know what best practices are, and that way we can, the spread, minor spreads are going to be inevitable, but reducing overall community transmission is really important. So that's our main focus. Every long-term care facility that has positive cases is assigned to an inspector in our office, and then also an epidemiologist at the Department of Public Health. So there is a lot of focus and a lot of attention being paid. We've also been doing a lot of outreach with the mask orders that have been coming through public health initiatives. We send, notices out to all the businesses. If we get complaints, we try to take an educational approach as opposed to being punitive. We provide documentation. We've come up with some really colorful guidance, pictures, charts to get people to understand what we're asking them to do and not just tell them, you need to do this. We want people to understand the importance of it. So that has been a lot of what my inspectors are doing. I want to thank all of my inspectors. They've been really great. They're working very hard in some challenging circumstances. And I also want to thank all the people who are making and donating masks. That can be a controversial topic, but the masks are a really important step in minimizing community transmission as well. And there's a lot of people out there donating time and resources to making those. And I think that's a really important part of a community response. So those are the majority of the activities that we're doing. We answer a lot of phone calls. We try to make sure that people who are concerned speak to somebody in person, that we return calls right away, because fear can really be a damaging aspect of this, and we want to minimize people's fear through education. So the best way we can do is get back to people, give them the information they need, try to calm them down or explain circumstances that can be difficult at a job or with family members. And that's really our responsibility and our obligation, is to educate and to make sure that people have the resources available to them. So that's a baseline of what we're doing.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate that update. I'm going to pass it over to Mike Bloomberg.
Yeah, I'm going to try to go quick to leave as much time for questions as possible. But as you all probably know, the emergency management director had traditionally been a stipend position under that of the fire chief. And as we started having meetings in February with the Emergency Management Advisory Council and recognizing the type of situation that this would be, that's where certainly with Chief Jackowski having a full-time job of having to manage a fire department, a traditional emergency such as a hurricane or a fire is what that role was set up for. This being an ongoing emergency with really no short-term end date. It was the request of the fire chief and under the advisement of the Emergency Management Advisory Council to find an immediate interim solution to address the early preventative challenges that we knew were coming. And to expand on that, my role has not been to invent an emergency response. My role is to really take in information from experts, whether it be from our Emergency Management Advisory Council, our police and fire chief, our Board of Health, and the numerous statewide partners we have with MEMA, MMA, the governor's office, and our federal partners with FEMA, and to take their guidance on what the latest science is and what the latest actions are, and operationalize that, which is really that's the value of being in the position of when you're the mayor's chief of staff. It's a lot of connecting folks and operationalizing for good outcomes. Things like how could we go about safely, essentially shutting down city hall operations while making sure that critical operations can continue, while making sure that everybody is safe, right? It's how do we have council meetings, right? We're on Zoom, and we're essentially rolling with the punches, and we are getting information down from the state. But I also want to say that it's one of the most important parts of my job is bringing information up to the state and up to the federal government, with a lot of the folks who are on the call with us today, but from folks who are within the community. I think one of the best things that we did, which was one of the simplest things, was creating our email, coronaresponse@holyoke.org. That has been a wealth of information. As you all are aware, the tips about the Soldiers Home have come in through that email. Folks who are offering to make and donate masks have come in through that email. And so really operationalizing the science and information that we're getting. The last thing I'll say is of course, this wasn't meant to be permanent, as we are looking towards shifting towards a recovery phase. We've taken the immediate swift actions, and we have some formal structure set up. The goal is that I will transition back to the role of chief of staff. We've got a budget that we had put together, had to hit pause on, had to redo, and so it's been a lot of overlap, of course, doing both of those jobs. So I know on your agenda tonight, as a late file order for tonight's agenda, is the mayor's appointment of Jeff Trask to be the new emergency management director for the city, who would be the ongoing emergency management director of the city, pending your all confirmation. Jeff has been chair and is currently the chair of the Mayor's Emergency Management Advisory Council. He's a fire commissioner and Holyoke resident, and is also the director of emergency management for ISO New England. You have his resume, and you have the appointment letter. But what we want to say with that, and I just got a text saying my connection is breaking up. So if anybody has any questions, please do let me know. But we'll be moving forward with Jeff Trask as the Director of Emergency Management, pending your approval, and I will be assisting in that transition. So if any of that was missed, just please let me know.
All right, next is Marcos.
Thank you, Councilor. Mimicking what Mike was saying, by mid-February, it was clear that something big was upon us, and the mayor and Mike tapped me to assist them in preparing the city with the plans for an orderly shutdown and a change in operations. After the first couple of weeks, where we were really emphasizing the prevention part of the equation, it was clear that needs were going to be mounting, and were mounting, that need to be mitigated in the community. And so we tapped people either within City Hall or stakeholders within the community that were available to help us think through some of the critical challenges that were popping up in seemingly three buckets that we were seeing, either through conversations with stakeholders, direct conversations, some of the Facebook Live video feeds that the mayor was having, or the corona response at holyoke.org. Kind of like the economy bucket with businesses suffering losses clearly by being shut down, a shelter bucket where there are different challenges, whether it was for first responders or domestic violence victims or homelessness, and then a social services bucket where we were lucky enough where Representative Aaron Vega was also stepping up and starting to coalesce organizations in the city, and a lot of organizations that also had a lot of experience from the Hurricane Maria back in Puerto Rico, that got together to sort of self-organize. And so each one of these groups has helped us collect information either from the broader stakeholder community in Holyoke or best practices that then they can provide brainstorming power and dedicate time to brainstorm on how we would modify or implement best practices in the Holyoke context. And so they can feed that information over to the emergency management team, and we can discuss them and ultimately think about how to actually operationalize it and execute. So from that, you've probably seen that the city has a business assistance grant, an idea that came out of the local economy team or how it was structured. There are weekly calls with social service agencies where we make sure that the needs are kind of covered. There's no unnecessary duplicity of efforts, and any gaps are addressed in a systemic way. And even in the sheltering group, some of the work you may not have seen, thankfully, because some of that was inventorying overrun facilities in case the Holyoke Hospital ran out of beds. And luckily, we have not seen that, and hopefully we won't, and it seems like we won't. But also identifying beds for first responders, or how we would provide some sort of sanitary stations for the homeless. We hope and expect that soon we will be planning on a recovery phase, and a lot of that will be determined by federal and state actions, and of course how the virus behaves within our community. So I just want to give a quick overview of what the teams have been working on, and obviously if any of you have any suggestions or thoughts and ideas, please feel free to reach out, and we will clearly integrate that into our thought process. Thank you.
Tanya, I see Tanya's here. It's on mute, Tanya.
Can you hear me?
Can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, great. I apologize for that. I'm having some difficulties. So I just wanted to say a little bit about the budget. And that is that I just want to reiterate what the mayor says. I would definitely be submitting it by the May 15th deadline. The mayor's office did create a budget committee this year for fiscal year 2021. We've been working collaboratively with our department heads to create a transparent budget. We've been looking at all different types of things, salaries. We've been working on averages of the fiscal years and how we can make a more transparent budget. It's hard for us right now because it's hard to estimate revenues. We do have numbers from the governor's budget. We've created different scenarios on how we can expect the economy to go, which is obviously very difficult. But we are working very hard on that, and we are also waiting for directives from the state, as the mayor says. Other than that, about the budget, I'm not sure if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer anything that has to do with that. Also, as far as our spending with the virus, we have not gone into deficit. We're doing very good as far as fiscal year 2020. We're working with all the department heads, and we feel like we're moving forward in a very positive manner. That's all I really have to say.
Okay, I know those are from the updates of the people listed. There's other people here for Q&A. That would be both chiefs. Mike McManus, the DPW director, are also online. I do see a hand that is up. That would be Councilor Lisi. You have a question? You're still on mute, Councilor. There you go.
Hi, yes. So I just want to ask quickly to Tanya, thanks so much for being on the call this evening. I wanted to know how much flexibility is being built into the 2021 budget. I'm sure we'll hear more about it in detail, but the last I understood, there was a recommendation from the DOR to do month-to-month budgets, and I was wondering if our full fiscal year 2020 budget is actually a series of individual month budgets, or if it is a full year budget that we would normally see, in more normal or standard times?
So we did have a meeting with the state that, all of the communities were on, all the municipalities. They did talk about the 112 budget, but they haven't really given any directive, like any written directive. They just had a conversation about it. So what we've done is we are preparing your whole fiscal year budget to submit to you by your deadline of May 15th.
Okay, and then is there a sense within individual departments if things needed to be reorganized? There's like various like contingency plans, or do people understand what they might have to cut or what is being prioritized in their department? To what extent can we make really quick, sort of like on a nice edge, sort of like transitions to address the varying needs that may come up month to month in the next year?
So I feel like if anything happens critical, we might move to the 112 budget scenario. We haven't seen that come, like we're waiting for directives from the state. So it's very difficult for me to say what we actually need to do. All we can do is what surrounding communities are doing, which is preparing their 2021 budget, doing their estimating their revenues as best as possible and how we might be impacted. We're looking at the governor's budget. We're doing different scenarios on revenues. And if we have to, yes, we will submit a 112 budget. It's not our intention, but we might get a directive from the state, or the governor's budget might come out to us, which might show that we're going to miss, some revenue. Then we're going to have to adjust to that. So at that time, when we get that, until it's solid information, we don't want to create any type of a environment where people are struggling because we don't need to do that yet. Does that make sense?
It does.
I would just chime in here as well. And the state was leaning towards recommending a 112 budget, and it seems like they've backed off of that recommendation and are now suggesting a full FY21 budget, but recognizing like cuts and changes may be possible. And as I said before, we're going to be conservative and put in some reductions in local receipts and put in the governor's budget for now, with the understanding again that revenues between now and when we set the tax rate, revenue we never have a full picture. As you know, the state never has a final budget on July 1st, even though local cities and towns are required to. And so we always make decisions without all of the information we have, and we adjust accordingly in the months following the ratification by the city council of our spending. And so it's in flux a little bit, obviously more in flux this year. And so that's just important for us. But I will say, to your question about department heads, we have posed bigger questions to department heads around what potentially would the future of your department look like delivering core services. You take the senior center, for example. I imagine that CDC recommendations may not allow for hundreds of seniors to be in the same building within the next 12 to 18 months before there's a vaccine. So again, we want to be informed by data and science. And if that's the case, do we redeploy those employees for another purpose, or do we shrink that department for the time being? And so those are the conversations that we need to have internally. We don't obviously we don't want to spend money that we don't have to spend, but we also want to make sure we're providing core services. But we also don't want to have an undue hardship on hardworking employees at the city. But we are posing those bigger questions to department heads. And mind you, our three biggest departments, police, fire, and DPW, fires are still happening. There's still a need for a police department, and the DPW has been working their tail off. So there's not too much room in the biggest departments to cut, but we are going to have to look at what does the future of government look like as we recover from this moving forward. And is that due to a lack of resources and funding, or is it because there's a new way to deliver services that abides by the health and data we're being told?
Right. And if I could just follow up. Thanks, Mr. President. So it just seems that I'm really glad. It's really assuring to hear you talking to department heads about core services. It definitely seems that as you mentioned, the DPW is working their tail off, and I think that's a department that has been traditionally understaffed and underfunded. And so if there's an ability to reallocate resources in some way within the budget, I'd be happy and looking forward to seeing some of that. But I do want to stress, and I think that you're getting to it by asking department heads about the core services and maintaining those core services. I think that we don't want to come into a situation where we have to make decisions in crisis mode. And so if there could be some sort of expectations that we understand how to be flexible within each department, I think that allows us to at least have some sort of skeleton in place for the way we need to move forward. And of course we'd be flexible because we can't predict the future, but at the same time we can. I would hope that department heads are anticipating ways they can be flexible, and that's the message that I want to get across there tonight.
All right, so just one thing. Hold on one thing. We're at 6:46. Councilor McGivern was next, and I see Councilor Murphy raising his hand on the screen. I just saw Councilor Sullivan. Hold on, so Councilor McGivern. Joe, you're muted.
Thank you, Mr. President. My mouth isn't working too good tonight. I just want to say a couple of quick comments, and I have one extra question, but more of a repeat for something Sean said. But first of all, Mayor Morse, thank you for calling this meeting. Thank you for bringing what most of us know, the emergency management team, together to present this, not just to us, but for all of our constituents and residents of Holyoke who are, I'm sure, watching and listening with great earnest this evening. To everyone that spoke this evening, to everyone that's here that didn't speak, we know your jobs are difficult, more difficult than they normally are, and we appreciate you rising to this occasion to work for all the residents of the city of Holyoke. Someday we'll sit together and talk about this, but it's incredible what each of you have done, and of course what the men and women under your command have done also, not just in the police and fire, but the DPW, and so on and so forth. It's incredible. I have, besides thank yous, I just wanted to say, Mayor, I agree with the 12-month budget, and I'm glad the state backed off, because a 1-month budget is great for 1 or 2 months as a stopgap, but all of this is an emergency and it isn't real planning. So good. I'm glad that they backed off. I'm glad you're going to present the full budget. Just if we could take one quick opportunity, Mr. President, I think one of the most important things that's coming out of this, and it's not just coming out of the city of Holyoke, is the contact tracing. And Sean, I think you're still with us. I'm not sure. Yes. Sean, if you could take an opportunity real quick, because you already said it, but can you tell people to expect phone calls from the Board of Health, and that not to be afraid that to answer those calls, because many people see a number they don't recognize and they don't answer it. They don't pick it up.
Yeah, so please do expect calls. They will be coming, some from our office, some from the Department of Public Health, and some will be from private phones, as we are trying to prioritize people from working from home. This information is secure. It will not be reported to any other agencies. We're not trying to do any other enforcement. All we're trying to do is gather the information necessary to ensure that people who may have been exposed are notified, and just reduce the community spread. There's no other purpose, and we won't be gathering that information for anything else. It's used for this, and then that's it. So please do expect calls. It will be brief. We'll ask a few questions, and that'll be the end of your commitment to time.
Thank you. And I think it's so important that we all participate in those type of phone calls as time goes on. It will make as we get out there, it's going to make us a much safer environment itself. It's incredibly important. And I thank you all for what you do. A great thumbs up. Mayor, the only person that's not here, and I've talked to everybody on the phone just to check on how the budgets are doing and stuff, but the only person that's not here is one of the most important persons you put together, and I think Marcus had a hand in it, but that's Kate from Wisteriahurst, because I look forward to that email every day just as a daily report and to keep updated, and the multitude of links that she provides. She's doing an incredible job of keeping us informed of what you're all doing. Thank you again.
Councilor Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to echo, you are hearing me, Todd?
Yeah, I can hear you perfect.
Okay. I just want to echo what Councilor McGivern just said. I want to thank the mayor for calling the meeting. I want to thank the department heads for working in a very difficult situation and doing an outstanding job. But there are a few things I want to emphasize and things I would like to question and ask. One for Chief Febo. I know I saw a couple of articles about more fatalities because people are speeding. And I know I had the 20-minute speed limit on Main Street. And I can tell you right now that in the last month and a half, I've seen people passing, because we don't have dividing lines anymore, but passing. But it used to be going 45 to 50, and now they're going, I'm going to say, I've seen with the sign that says 20 miles an hour, I've seen people going past 60. Not only down here, but also on Route 5, and I'm sure it's other places. So I know you got a lot of things going on, but if there's any way of creating a little bit of additional radar so that we can make the streets safe, we've got enough people. I don't want anybody getting killed in an accident. I know we're trying to prevent other things, but that's one concern I have, and I definitely have seen a dramatic increase in speeding and unsafe driving. And couple other things for Sean. I'm just wondering when we're all said and done, if it's possible for us to get a breakdown, if there's an excess of this in certain neighborhoods, so that we can determine if there are things that we can do environmentally, in terms of cleaning a building, whatever the case might be, so that if that is in fact something that's taking place. I know Chelsea has had articles about it taking place in lower income neighborhoods where you have apartment buildings and things along that line. So I want to make sure that we get the facts from this and statistics, so that if there is anything we can do after the fact, so that we can prevent something like this, or at least lessen the degree of something like this ever happening again, that would be much appreciated. Third, I'd like to encourage the idea that a banking service is an essential service, and I do that for a couple of reasons. I mean, I've been through the people automatic teller thing window there, and you can tell I'm old here, but the reality is that is really not providing a service for the senior citizens who don't have it. Many of them don't have ATMs. I know I was waiting for the window teller last week, and I saw two elderly cars in front of me, and neither one of them ever got to the service. And in fact, both of them almost fell because they tried to get out of their cars to try to figure out what was going on. So if there's any way that we can provide through mask and everything else, and obviously controlling traffic, to open up banking services, I would encourage us to do that. I would think that would actually probably be safer in terms of not having people walking by each other if we control traffic than in a drugstore or in a grocery store. And last, I've spoken for a couple of times in the last week or so, with school reopening, I'm going on to the idea that we're recovering, and at some point in the fall, we're going back to school. I mean, I think that needs to be a community-wide discussion, both in terms of getting the education back for those kids. I know we've tried to get them as much online learning as possible, but the reality is most of those kids are not going to come back and be where they should be if they were still in school for the last 10 weeks. And so we need to do that. And also in terms of whether or not we're going to require extra spacing in schools, which would require us to lower classroom enrollments, where are we going to get the money? And I've already talked, I know there's, I think 6 or 7 schools that have additional space, but where do we get the money to pay for additional teachers, so that instead of having 25 kids in a class, we might have 12 to 15 kids in a class and offer better spacing, which would also accelerate learning. So those are my concerns. I appreciate all that's been done. I know this is not a pleasurable time in the city, but I'm optimistic we're going to get through this, and I appreciate it. And again, if you can address any of those concerns, I would appreciate it in the near future. Thank you.
All right. Councilor Sullivan. Yeah, Mr. Graney, Councilor Graney.
Yes, Mr. President, I'm taking copious notes here. Would it be possible for us to hear all the presentations of the department heads and then ask questions later so that we can move this meeting?
All the updates are done. This is some people just want to get some questions out before we run out of time, which is about 6 minutes.
Are we going to hear from Chief Breskopowski or Chief Febo?
There, as on the agenda, it's available for updates and Q&A. I'd say with them, I mean, I'll ask Counselor Sullivan to go first, and then we can ask the two chiefs to speak. So Counselor Sullivan.
Okay, thank you.
Can I give a quick answer to Terry, 30 seconds?
Yeah.
I just want to notify, so this is Mike Bloomberg, Acting Director of Emergency Management. Banking service are considered essential services, and with many of anything that's essential services, when things were closed down, a lot of things were closed down by the city acting in advance of the state. However, when the governor has since come on with closures for non-essential businesses, the state law and the state regulations supersede any of the local regulations. That said, we as a city never shut down the banking services, and neither has the governor. So with the banking services, that's up to each individual bank branch if they've decided not to. And then with the big picture, with the reopening, it is conversations between us and the state. But right now, if there is a non-essential business that the governor deems non-essential, which we as a city wanted to open up, we wouldn't actually have that authority. So while a lot of the shutdown was driven by the city, a lot of the reopenings are going to be driven by the state.
Hold on, Counselor Murphy. In all due respect, Counselor Sullivan, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So this question's for Sean. Earlier on, you mentioned we had 657 cases in the city. Was that the number?
671.
671. So that's since the start of the outbreak?
Yeah, that's to date. And that's only people who were tested and the tests were made its way to the Department of Public Health.
All right, so 671 cases. How many of those have recovered?
We don't have recovery data. Many of the facilities that have positive cases have not reported that consistently. And then community data, it's difficult to get a hard line for recovery. There is an end to the contagion period, but there's not like 2 weeks is usually what's accepted as recovered, but we don't have hard recovery numbers.
So of the 671 cases, do we have any idea how many are active cases ongoing right now?
I don't have we are trying to treat every person who was positive and continue to treat them as positive for the time being. If it were to come to emergency services, or if it were to come to handling that, even people who return to work, we are advising people to do so with caution. So I don't have a hard number for that, because we don't feel at this time there's enough information to say, okay, your 2 weeks are up and everything's fine, go back to normal.
Okay, so really the only thing we have is the running total of how many people have had it over 8 or 10 weeks, but no data at all as to how many active cases there are today in the community.
I can go back afterwards and I can get a little more information. I only provided this information for the brief overview. But as I said, many of these are in long-term care facilities, and they are under the gun right now with their crisis mode. And so they are not giving us data in that manner. That's not what's being requested specifically to Maven or ourselves. And so that's not how we're gathering the information.
Okay, and I'm not faulting the job you're doing. It just seems to me we're trying to make a lot of decisions, and not just in Holyoke, but throughout the Commonwealth, throughout the county. Nowhere in any of their statistics do I see a number of actual active cases right now.
That number of 671, I don't want people to seize onto that as 671 in the entire population of Holyoke. That's 671 people who were able to access tests and the test became positive. There are many people who were diagnosed clinically by a doctor who never had access to tests, and that's never reported to the Board of Health because it's not a test. And there are plenty of people who are asymptomatic who don't even know that they have it. So that number is only really based off of people who could get tested. It's not representative of people in the community who have it or who have spread it.
I totally get that. There's a huge delta between what we know have had it and the unknown, how many have had it and never know it all. And it's absolutely all gone through the system. So
Yeah.
I totally get that. The only other quick question I had then was, I've seen a tremendous upspike in the number of homeless and addicts in the city. I've heard from everybody that we're providing facilities, we're doing this, reaching out to them and stuff, but we've now got 3 tent cities that have cropped up. One's grown to 5 or 6 down on the river. There's one under 391 that's actually set up a latrine, an outhouse out there. They're behind Mitchell Field. They're under the Muller Bridge. We've got people standing out in traffic in the middle of Beach Street by Mackenzie Field, standing in the middle of the road, no mask on or anything. People stop, a hazard to the public, a hazard to themselves. And the last time I heard anything, I'm glad we've got Manny on here at the same time, Chief Febo, to address this with you. I don't want to hear about the American Civil Liberties Union or their First Amendment rights. If we've got a public safety crisis going, right, it should apply to these people as well. If we can stop our citizens from playing tennis and going out on a golf course, I don't see how we can't stop this and force these people into a program or into a facility for their own good and the safety of the public.
My only response to that would be that the current guidance from the CDC is not to disrupt tent cities at the moment, because dispersal is only going to cause people who are homeless, who are in those tent cities, to move to other areas. And
We're not
Hey, guys, hey, wait, I'm gonna stop both of you. We're over time. We have another meeting right after this. We do have
Mr.
both
President.
chiefs on. Well, hold on one second. We have both chiefs on. I'd like for the next few minutes, allow Chief Febo or Chief Jackowski or both to give any information that would be helpful for the public. But then we have to move on to the full city council meeting. That is the rule. So to the chiefs, Chief Jackowski, if you'd like to go first.
So Todd, can I ask a point of information?
Yeah, Councilor Leahy.
That's not the rule. We can open up the city council meeting. Then we could.
Well, you have to open it up and then do it. We haven't done that yet.
Right. So we could open it up, then we can go back to this special meeting.
If you want to, but there's no motion yet. So with that, with the chief on, let's go to the chief.
Thanks for having me. I'll be real quick. Obviously, this COVID crisis has been a challenge for all public safety agencies. I can vouch for myself and for Chief Febo. We've been eating and breathing this COVID-19 for the past 3 months. Every waking moment, it seems like we've been either dealing with PPE issues or coming up with new policy and procedures within our department to keep our people safe. With that, I think we've done an extraordinary job of doing just that and keeping our people safe and keeping them at work and safe so they can respond to the emergency calls that our citizens demand from us. Some of the policies and procedures that we've had to institute have never been seen before within the fire department. Closing down fire stations to the public. It's something you just don't do, but we had to do it in this instance. Providing or mandating self-checks of our employees, making sure that they're checking their own symptoms before they come to work, making sure they're checking their own symptoms when they're halfway through their shift, taking their own temperatures, making sure that they're fit for duty so they can continue to respond to people's homes in a safe manner. These things have never been done before. A whole masking procedure, which every employee of the fire department is now wearing masks when they're at the station or when they're responding to calls or when they're going to people's homes. This is all brand new to the fire service. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. When we're walking around the fire station on a normal day, under a COVID situation, we're at a medium to high threat level to ourselves because of community spread and the way that fire service works. We have a lot of people in a small space. So when we put a mask on, I have a mask on, and the person that I'm talking to has a mask on, we're instantly at a low threat level, which has really done wonders for the fire department. We've kept our cases to a minimum. We've had a very small number of positive cases and symptomatic people. So all these measures have really paid dividends. And to this point, we've only had 4 positive cases within the department. We have 130 members, 4 positive cases. 3 people that tested negative that were symptomatic for something. It wasn't COVID, but they were symptomatic for something, and they tested negative. And then we had to self-quarantine 1 firefighter for traveling out of the country. He had to self-quarantine for 14 days. But other than that, we're responding to the calls. We're responding to the fires. The fires are still happening, regardless of what COVID-19 wants to do. We had 4 fires in the past 3 weeks. So we're responding to the COVID-19 calls. We're responding to the fire calls. We're responding to the accidents. Everything that we continue to do, we're still providing the services and our mission to the citizens of Holyoke. And just to end, I've never been more proud of the men and women of the Holyoke Fire Department. They have been coming to work, and normal people want to stay home with their families. They're coming to work. They're doing the calls. They're not complaining. And I just wanted to put that on record that I've never been more proud of these guys, and they continue to surprise me every day, and they make me so proud to lead them. That's basically all I have. I know you guys have another meeting. If you have any questions to the fire service, I can certainly try to answer those.
A question.
Yeah, Councilor Martinez.
Yes, hi.
Councilor.
I know that our ambulance services is a subcontract, or we're contracting it out, but I also want to know how, I checked in with Frank McNeil, and I know there's been several cases there. How is that kind of, what can you?
Right, so as you know, Action Ambulance and the Holyoke Fire Department were partners in emergency medical services. They were in our stations, responding from our stations. Their dispatchers were in our dispatch bureau, sharing a dispatch space. When this COVID-19 crisis hit, we made a decision to separate services, to move both departments in different directions into different buildings to protect the Holyoke Fire Department dispatchers from the Action dispatchers and vice versa. And that move paid dividends over time, because as you said, the transporting ambulance service is far more exposed to a lot of the COVID cases than we are, and they have had some positive cases within their department, and they're dealing with that internally. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you,
Mr. President.
Is that Councilor
Mr. President? Yes, just quickly. One of the reasons I wanted to hear from the chiefs was I wanted to find out what the overall health of our first responders was, and from what Chief Preskopowski has said, that's good news considering the circumstances, and we're very proud of them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chief Febo?
Hello, can you hear me?
Can hear you. Thank you, sir.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, we're pretty much largely unaffected here, based on all the mitigation efforts that we put in. With policy changes every single day as the circumstances change, and our guys are doing an amazing job. I'm just going to reiterate what Jeff said. Jeff, basically, this has never been done before. The police department has really go out every single day, put on masks, and the world of policing is flipped upside down. We're aware of different types of issues that are popping up, and we're addressing them as they come up. And the guys, you should be proud of the men and women of the police department that come in every day without complaint, and they're doing a great job. And we, as far as our health of the department, we have had 0 work-related positives. That's something to be proud of. These guys are doing everything they were supposed to do, wearing masks when dealing with people, social distancing, washing their hands, cleaning their workspaces, cleaning the cruisers, and things are going well.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for either chief? Councilor Hernandez, I saw the hand pop up. Yep.
Hi, thank you, Mr. President. I just want to really give a hand of applause to both of our public safety departments, the Holyoke Fire Department and the Holyoke Police Department, and also the officers that are putting their mask on and walking our streets here in Ward 4. We really thank you. It makes a difference. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, Todd.
Yeah, I see your hand pop up. Yep.
I have a lot of questions, but essentially we don't have a lot of time. So I just a couple of things I wanted to do first is in this transition period, I want to thank Councilor or Mike Bloomberg. Mike Bloomberg, at first I was a little concerned, and I sent him an email and he wrote me back, and I think he did a fantastic job. So I just want to appreciate the work that you did, Michael. You were, anytime I had any questions or needed anything, you were right there. So thank you so much for that. And I also want to thank Kate. Kate's been providing all of us with information, and myself, Sheila, Josh, and Faith have been, giving it out to the people in Hello Holyoke, and that's over 13,000 people. And on the back end, we have probably about 6,000 people who read that every day, and we see that. So that's impressive, and I want to give a big shout out to her. But I also want to give a shout out to everybody else in this team. This is a pandemic. This is a worldwide thing that the city of Holyoke, you can't be prepared for this. And I think we were. But, the fire department, police department, all the teachers, it's amazing how much work is getting done. And all these students are sitting there and taking Zoom calls and Zoom classes. And the parents are turning into teachers, and the teachers are teaching. And I just want to thank all the teachers out there who are caring. Also the food service employees. It was mentioned earlier, the mayor mentioned how many meals have gone out. These people are still working day in, day out. The Boys and Girls Club are doing the same thing. Please not forget the DPW workers. These guys are also working their tail off. And not to mention the people who bring all our mail, the postal employees. Every day they're out there and they're kicking butt. I'd like to say something else, but they're doing a fantastic job. So just in closing, I'm not going to ask any questions because I don't have time. However, I just want to say thank you so much. And one last thing, I keep saying it, please update the website and stop getting this pop-up. It's getting so many Facebook messages about the website. It still says school is going to be opening May 5th. I don't think that's happening. Thank you.
Councilor
The
Tanya.
new website launches tomorrow. I just wanted to share that. I'm so excited. We're as excited as you.
Yep.
You're on, Councilor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. I just want to thank the mayor and his team for all the work they've done, especially the department heads, and to remind the citizens out there the importance of the social distancing, of wearing masks and washing hands. This is the only way we're going to get through this, by following the guidelines of the CDC, and everybody that has really worked together in these difficult times, getting out the message to our citizens and our residents. It's vital that we continue to do the work that we're doing, and I'm glad that the mayor brought this special meeting together, and maybe on a monthly basis we can get together this way to get updates to give them to our citizens, because it's important that we have the knowledge and the tools that we need to know what to do in these situations, because that's the only way that we're going to get through this, by safety, by listening to our health officials, and from the governor of our state, that's not rushing into anything, that the importance is staying safe, staying healthy. The economic positions of our city will come forward, but right now we have to take the health of our citizens as number one priority. So I want to thank the mayor and his team and all the department heads for doing the job they're doing to keep us informed and moving forward with during a very difficult time. So thank you very much.
I don't see any other hands. Councilor Sullivan.
Yeah, I just wanted the opportunity to finish what I was saying before. I was cut short. I'm the only counselor all night that's been cut short. I didn't say a lot. And I want a chance to respond to something that was said about dispersal. All right. And as far as dispersal, I understand what the state is saying about that. I understand the guidelines are coming out. What is going on in Holyoke? We're not dispersing anything. Everybody is dispersing, and it's coming here. Our population of homeless and addict is growing throughout this entire epidemic. All right. And if nobody else sees that, they're blind.
Okay. So with that, we're at 7:14. We will be making a motion to adjourn this one. From what I've been told by Ryan is don't leave, counselors don't leave, or if you're staying for the meeting because you have something on there, just stay on. That way we can transition over to the next meeting. We're not going to do another call-in number. So with that, the motion would be to adjourn.
Motion adjourned.
Yeah, we'll take a 5-minute break before, but don't log out of this is my whole point. Don't leave this Zoom meeting. Hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you.
Right,
Thank you all.
Motion is adjourned. I want to thank everyone for coming. So a motion is to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? We adjourn the special meeting. We'll call the full city council meeting in 5.